On January 6, 1951, basketball fans witnessed something that had never been done before and has never been done since. When the Indianapolis Olympians took on the Rochester Royals in an NBA battle with two teams that fans today have never heard of, went a total of 6 overtimes, lasting 78 grueling minutes, etching itself in NBA lore, and is something that will never happen again, as the NBA has changed so much since this time. How did it all unfold? Who was victorious? And what makes this game so unforgettable? That's what we're going to talk about today on Daily Sports History. And that's what we're going to talk about today on Daily Sports History. Welcome to Daily Sports History. I'm Ethan Reese, your guide, as you daily learn more about sports history, increasing your sports knowledge. And today's trivia question to listen out for is, who won the 1951 NBA championship? Now, the average NBA game that you watch today takes about 2 to 2.5 hours to watch, depending on how many fouls, how the offenses and defense are playing, all that goes into it. But one thing we all get very excited for is overtime. Overtime happens in the NBA when two teams finish the fourth quarter at the end of regulation tied, and they need to play extra time to finish out the game. They play 5 extra minutes, and usually after that one overtime, one team comes out on top and the game is over. Sometimes they need extra, like in 2019 when the Bulls took on the Atlanta Hawks in a 4 overtime struggle. That's all the teams each score over 160. Or in 1989 when the Milwaukee Bucks took on the Seattle Supersonics in a 5 overtime game that saw each of them score over 150, where the Seattle Supersonics won by 1 point. And then we got to go way back to when the Anderson Packers and the Syracuse Nationals, yes, those were 2 NBA teams in 1949, went to 5 overtimes, with the Nationals winning 125 to 123. But none of those were the longest game. That happened in 1951 when the Indianapolis Olympians took on the Rochester Royals, going 6 overtimes. And how did this happen? First, let's figure out who the Indianapolis Olympians are, because chances are you've never heard of them, as I grew up near Indianapolis and have never heard of this team. They were founded in 1949 and they folded in 1953, which is why you never heard of them. But they did play in an iconic location. They played in the Butler Fieldhouse, where Butler University plays, which is now known as Hinkle Fieldhouse, but became famous in the movie The Hoosiers, where they won their championship game in the final scene. Now, that year they were founded, they were actually supposed to join the NBL, the National Basketball League. However, that league merged with the Basketball Association of America to make the NBA that we know today, and so they started that way. Their team colors were red, white, and blue, making them look very much like the Harlem Globetrotters. And they were part of the Western Division at the time. And that first season, they actually finished first in the Western Division, winning 39 games and making it all the way to the divisional round where they lost to the Anderson Packers. And in 1951, 2 of their best players, Alex Gorza and Ralph Beard, who won gold medals with the U.S. team in 1948 and both played at University of Kentucky, were suspended from the NBA for life when they admitted to point shaving during their college careers. So it was very challenging for the Indianapolis Olympians, and this caused them to have a losing record of 31-37. But on January 6th, they would go on to make a record in the NBA that still stands, despite the fact that the team would not. And they would go on to face the Rochester Royals, who actually were founded in 1923 as the Rochester Seagrams. They were actually sponsored by a Canadian distiller called Seagram, where they got their original name. And they would play teams as a semi-professional league and work their way up to the NBL in 1945. And they changed their name to the Rochester Royals. And they would keep that name even joining the NBA in 1948, which was a huge jump for them as they needed to pull together $25,000 to join, over $400,000 today, to go from a semi-pro team to a professional team in the NBL. And in the 1950-51 season, they had a great year, led by Arnie Rison, a 6'9", 200-pound center who was nicknamed Stilts, as that was pretty tall for back in the 1950s. And they also had two other big men in Artie Johnson and Jack Coleman, with a backcourt manned by Bob Davis and Bobby Wisner. Coming into the game, both teams were actually playing pretty good. The Indianapolis Olympians were about a 500 team, and the Rochester Royals were 19-10. And both these teams were in the Western Division. I know it sounds weird that a team in Indiana and a team in Rochester was in the West, despite being in New York. But there were 5 other teams just a little bit more east than Rochester, so they got put in the West. And this happened a lot with pro leagues back in the day. They started mainly on the East Coast, which is it's kind of interesting to think about. They started very similar to the way America started. We started on the East Coast and migrated west. And that's exactly how Major League Baseball started, football, basketball. They all started east and worked their way west. It was very interesting that they followed the same trajectory as we followed in this country as we grew from east to west. So the game actually happened in Rochester at Edgerton Park Arena, where they played their home games. And the Indianapolis Olympians were going to be led in this game by Don Barksdale, a standout performer who was effectively a scorer, and Hugh Sweet Carasy, as the Royals were led by Arnie Rison and Red Holzman. And the first 4 quarters were pretty tight. The Indianapolis Olympians took the early lead in the first quarter, leading 20-10. Now, I know that score is low. If you listen to a previous episode, we'll put a link in the description about the shot clock. That didn't happen until after this. So at this time, there was no shot clock, which is hard to wrap our mind around in today's day and age, but it was a lot different back then. And if you want a reference, again, to that, it is the movie Hoosiers. If you watch the movie Hoosiers, they hold on to the ball at the end of the game. That's how a lot of games were finalized back in the day. As a team that was an underdog, they got the lead, they would hold on to the ball as long as they could because there was no shot clock. It caused a lot of low scoring because this game, despite there being 6 overtimes, was a very low scoring. But in the second quarter, Rochester came back and made a 38-33 halftime score. And each of the teams came out in the second half and ended the third quarter 57-53. And the fourth quarter would not be a barn burner. There would be not a lot of scoring, as the Rochester Royals would score 12 points to come back, as the Indianapolis Olympians only scored 8 points. But the game ended up tied 63-63. So come the first overtime, both teams are fatigued. It's been a lot of pressure, and not a lot happens in this overtime. I will warn you, not a lot happens for most of these overtimes. The first overtime period, each team scores 2 points, sending it again into overtime. And the second overtime period shows again exhaustion and unwillingness to move the ball, as both teams score no points, sending it into a third overtime where again not much happens, as each team only scores 2 points, making the score 67-67, going into a fourth overtime where nobody scores again. Even though the excitement over overtime that we think of today is fun, this is one of the most boring things I've ever heard of. I would have hated to watch this. This is why, if you listen to the shot clock episode, they changed things, because it got bad in some games where their teams would hold onto the ball and not even attempt to score. But luckily in the fifth overtime, both teams came out with fury looking to score, and they each scored 4 points, making the score 73-73. But in overtime 6, the Indianapolis Olympians would come out and score a field goal and hold on to the ball, giving them the win, scoring 2 points to Rochester's 0 in the sixth overtime, giving them the win 75-73. Yes, you have that right. In 6 overtimes, they only scored 12 points, where the Rochester Royals only scored 10 points in 6 overtimes. It was hard to watch. But despite the Indianapolis Royals winning this, they did make the playoffs barely. They would lose in the first round that year. But the Rochester Royals would go on to have a great season and win the NBA championship, beating the New York Knicks in 4 games to win NBA Finals. And they would later bounce around, becoming the Cincinnati Royals in 1957, and then go to Kansas City, becoming the Kansas City Omaha Kings in 1972, and would move to Sacramento in 1985, where they still are today, known as the Sacramento Kings. And sadly, 1951 is the last time this team who has been around since 1923, has won an NBA championship. And they've only won 2 total championships, winning 1 in NBL previously. It is sad that they have not won more, but there's lots of reasons for that. But they have been a team, part of history, in more ways than one. In this overtime game, despite losing it, they had the last laugh as they won the title at the end of the day. And I want to thank you for listening to today's Daily Sports History. If you want more NBA content, check out the Dime Droppers podcast, where they dive into all things NBA. And we'll put a link in the description for you to check them out. And if you enjoyed today's episode of Daily Sports History, please make sure you are subscribed wherever you're listening. That way you do not miss a single episode. Come back tomorrow for more Daily Sports History. And the answer to today's trivia question, who won the 1951 NBA championship? And the answer is the Rochester Royals, who are now known as the Sacramento Kings. In 1951 was the last NBA championship they ever won.